The morning sun cast long shadows across the crystal gardens of Zalthara. Prime. Captain Vexthani stood on the observation deck of the defense station, watching the peaceful world below. The Zalthari people moved slowly through their daily routines, tending to the living buildings that grew from the planet's surface. Like enormous flowers, Vexthani had pale blue skin that seemed to glow in the sunlight. His large eyes could see colors that most species could not even imagine. Like all Zalthari, he was tall and thin, with long fingers that could feel the life force in every plant they touched. His people had lived this way for thousands of years, growing their cities instead of building them, healing instead of fighting. The communication panel beside him made a soft chime. It was a gentle sound like wind through leaves. Everything the Zalthari made was gentle. They did not believe in harsh sounds or sharp edges. Even their spaceships looked like giant seeds floating through space. "Captain," came the voice of communications. "Officer Helenana." Her voice carried worry, which was unusual for their kind. "We are receiving reports from the outer colonies." Vexthani turned from the window. "What kind of reports?" "The mining station at Zalthara 7 has gone silent. The agricultural world of Zalthara 4 sent a distress signal 12 hours ago, but now we cannot reach them either." The captain felt a cold fear growing in his chest. The Zalthari had few enemies. They traded fairly with other species and never took more than they needed from any world. Their technology was based on growth and healing, not destruction. They had always believed that peaceful intentions would protect them. "Have you contacted the Galactic Council?" Vexthani asked. "Yes, Captain. They say the Krellian swarm is moving." "Through this sector?" "They estimate the swarm will reach our outer worlds within 10 days. The fear in Vexthani's chest grew stronger. Every species in the galaxy knew about the Krellians. They were insects the size of small ships, with minds linked together in a collective consciousness. They moved from world to world like a plague, consuming everything in their path. Where they passed, nothing remained but empty rock floating in space. "How many ships do we have?" Vexthani asked, though he already knew the answer. 47 vessels, Captain. Most are transport ships or science vessels. Only 12 are equipped for defense, and their weapons are designed to disable, not destroy." Vexthani closed his eyes. The Zalthari had never needed a strong military. Their philosophy was built on the idea that violence only created more violence. They had healing rays instead of laser cannons. Their ships had shields designed to protect, not armor designed for war. "The Krellians have been spotted in the Vega system," Helena continued. "Long-range sensors count over 800 vessels. They are moving in a formation that blocks out the stars. 800 ships. The number made Vexthani feel sick. The Krellians did not negotiate. They did not accept surrender. They simply consumed everything in their path and moved on to the next world. "Contact the Council of Elders," Vexthani said. "Tell them we need an emergency meeting." 2 hours later, Vexthani stood in the council chamber. The room was grown from living wood, its walls covered in glowing moss that provided soft light. The 5 elders sat in chairs that had grown. From the floor, their ancient faces showing the wisdom of centuries, Elder Quivera spoke first. She was the oldest among them, her skin almost transparent with age. "We have reviewed the reports, Captain. The situation is more serious than we first believed." "The Galactic Council will not help us," added Elder Morthic. "They say the Krellians are too strong?" "Most species are evacuating their border worlds and retreating deeper into safe space." "What about the Andromedans?" Vexthani asked. "They have powerful ships." "They are protecting their own worlds," Elder Quivera replied. "The Centauri Federation has already pulled back their fleets. The Rigel Alliance is doing the same. No one wants to face the Krellians in open battle." Vexthani felt despair growing in his heart. "Then what can we do?" "We cannot evacuate 60 billion people in 10 days. Our ships are not designed for mass transport." The elders looked at each other with expressions of great sadness. Elder Quivera spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "There is one option. One that goes against everything we believe in. What option? Vexthani asked. We could send a distress signal to the Terran Federation. The words hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. Everyone in the chamber knew about the humans. They were the species that came from Earth, a world so violent and dangerous that it had created the most feared warriors in the galaxy. Other species called them Deathworlders because they came from a planet of death. The humans, Elder Morthic said slowly, are said to be more dangerous than the Krellians themselves. Vexthani had heard the stories. Human ships were built, like flying fortresses covered in weapons that could crack moons. Human soldiers fought with a fury that made other species flee in terror. They came from a world where everything tried to kill everything else, where the weather itself was a weapon, where the very air could burn your lungs. I have read the reports from the Centauri Wars, Elder Quivera continued. The humans do not fight like other species. They do not retreat when outnumbered. They do not surrender when defeated. They fight until they win or until they die. They are monsters, whispered Elder Jaltherin, the youngest of the council. The galactic archives are full of stories. Humans who fought for days with mortal wounds. Humans who destroyed entire fleets rather than let them escape. Humans who turned their own ships into weapons when their guns ran out. Vexthani had read those same reports. The Battle of Proxima, where a single human ship had held off an entire pirate fleet until reinforcements arrived. The Siege of Kepler Station, where human marines had fought room by room for 3 weeks against impossible odds. The humans had won both battles, but the cost had been terrible. If we call the humans, Elder Quivera said, we invite death itself to our peaceful worlds. But if we do nothing, the Krellians will consume us all. The chamber fell silent. Outside, the sounds of the city continued. Children played in the gardens. Adults tended to their growing homes. None of them knew that their world was about to face a choice between 2 different kinds of destruction. What do the reports say about human behavior toward peaceful species? Vexthani asked. Elder Morthic consulted his datapad. The records are unclear. Most species are too afraid to make contact with humans. The few reports we have suggest that humans distinguish between threats and non-threats. They seem to protect weaker species from predators. But they are still Deathworlders, Elder Jaltherin protested. They carry weapons that could destroy our entire world. Their ships are built for war. Their culture is based on violence. Their culture is based on survival, Elder Quivera corrected. They come from a world that tried to kill them every day. They learned to fight because they had to fight. But the question is, do they fight everyone, or do they fight only their enemies? Vexthani thought about his own people. The Zelthari had never had to fight for survival. Their world was gentle, their climate mild, their predators few and small. They had grown up believing that peace was the natural state of the universe, but now they were about to learn that the universe was not peaceful at all. We have 6 days before the Krellians reach our outer worlds, Vexthani said. If we are going to call for help, we must do it now, the elders voted. It was not unanimous, but it was enough. With heavy hearts, they authorized the transmission. Vexthani returned to the defense station and walked to the long-range communications array. The message would be simple. It would contain their coordinates, a basic description of the threat, and a request for aid. Nothing more. He looked out at his beautiful world one last time. In a few days it might be consumed by the Krellians, or it might be destroyed by the humans who came to save it. Either way, the peaceful life his people had known for millennia was about to end. Send the message, he said quietly. The transmission reached out across the galaxy, traveling faster than light toward the Sol system. Toward Earth, toward the most feared species in known space. The message was simple. Krellian swarm approaching. Peaceful species requests aid. Coordinates attached. Now all they could do was wait and hope that the cure would not be worse than the disease. Admiral Kate Morrison stood in the command center of Luna Station, watching the holographic display that showed the entire Sol system. Ships moved like bright dots between the planets, carrying trade goods and passengers across humanity's home system. Everything looked peaceful, but Kate knew that peace was always temporary. At 52 years old, Kate had gray hair and scars on her hands from the Centauri Wars. She had been fighting battles across the galaxy for 30 years, and she understood one simple truth: there was always another war coming. The only question was when and where. "Admiral," called Lieutenant Commander Ryan Walsh from the communications station. "We have received a priority transmission from outside the system." Kate turned toward him. Priority transmissions were rare. Most communication between star systems was routine trade reports or diplomatic messages. "What kind of transmission?" "It appears to be a distress signal, ma'am." "The translation systems are working on it now." Kate walked over to the communications station. The message was short and simple, but it made her blood run cold. She had heard of the Krellians before. Every military officer in the galaxy knew about them. They were the nightmare that kept peaceful species awake at night. "Where did this message come from?" she asked. "The Zelthara system, Admiral. It's about 40 light years from here." The message was sent 3 days ago. Kate thought quickly. 3 days for the message to reach Earth meant the situation was already critical. If the Krellians were moving as fast as the reports suggested, they might already be attacking the outer worlds of the Zelthara system. "What do we know about the Zelthari?" Kate asked. Ryan consulted his datapad. "They are a peaceful species, ma'am. No military conflicts on record. They trade in agricultural products and healing technologies. Population estimated at 60 billion across 12 worlds. 60 billion people." The number hit Kate like a physical blow. If the Krellians reached those worlds, it would be one of the largest genocides in galactic history. "Contact Fleet Command," Kate ordered. "Tell them we need Task Force 7 ready for immediate deployment." "Admiral," Ryan said carefully, "Fleet Command may ask why we are responding to a distress call from a species we have never contacted before." Kate looked at the young officer. He was right to be cautious. Humanity had learned to be careful about getting involved in galactic conflicts. Too many species still saw humans as dangerous monsters even when they were trying to help. "Tell Fleet Command that 60 billion innocent people are about to be killed by the Krellians," Kate said. "If they need more reason than that, they can call me directly." 2 hours later, Kate stood in the briefing room aboard the UES Defiant. The massive dreadnought was the flagship of Task Force 7, and it showed humanity's approach to war. The ship was built like a flying fortress, with armor plating thick enough to stop asteroid impacts and weapons powerful enough to crack moons. Captain Jake Sullivan sat at the conference table, reviewing the tactical data. Jake was 45 years old, with black hair and intense blue eyes. He had commanded the Defiant for 8 years, and his ship had never lost a battle. "The Krellians are moving fast," Jake said, looking at the star charts. "Our long-range sensors show them entering the outer edge of the Zelthara system. They have approximately 800 ships in their swarm." Captain Lisa Chun leaned forward in her chair. She commanded the UES Vengeance, the task force's assault carrier. Lisa was smaller than the other officers, but her reputation for tactical brilliance was known throughout the fleet. 800 ships is a lot, even for us. "What kind of support do the Zelthari have?" "Almost none," Kate replied. "They have about 50 ships total, and most of them are not designed for combat. The Zelthari are pacifists. They build their technology around healing and growth, not destruction." Commander Rick Barnes, who led the destroyer squadron, shook his head. "So we are going up against 800 Krellian ships with just our task force?" "That's correct," Kate said. "The Galactic Council has decided not to intervene. Most species are pulling back their fleets and abandoning the border." Worlds. The room fell silent. Everyone knew the odds they were facing. Task Force 7 had 36 ships, including the Defiant, the Vengeance, and Rick's destroyer squadron. They were outnumbered more than 20 to 1. "Admiral," Jake said slowly, "I need to ask the obvious question. Why are we doing this?" Kate looked around the table at her officers. They were all veterans of multiple conflicts. They had seen the worst that war could offer. But they were also human, and humans had never learned to abandon the innocent. Because if we don't, Kate said, 60 billion people will die. Because the Krellians will strip those worlds bare and move on to the next system. Because someone asked for our help. Captain Nina Clark, the task force's diplomatic officer, spoke up. Admiral, what do we know about how the Zelthari will react to our arrival? Most species are terrified of us. Kate had been thinking about the same question. Humanity's reputation in the galaxy was complicated. They were respected for their military power, but they were also feared for their willingness to use that power. Many species saw humans as barely controlled monsters. The Zelthari are desperate, Kate said. They sent a distress signal to the most feared species in the galaxy. They know what we are, and they called us anyway. That tells me they understand the situation they are in, or they have no idea what they have just invited to their system, Jake said quietly. Kate nodded. That was also possible. The Zelthari might have sent their distress signal without really understanding what humans were capable of. When Task Force 7 arrived at Zelthara Prime, they might find the local population more afraid of the humans than of the Krellians. That's why Captain Clark is coming with us, Kate said. We need to make sure the Zelthari understand that we are there to help, not to conquer. The briefing continued for another hour. They discussed tactics, supply lines, and emergency protocols. But everyone in the room knew that this mission was different from their usual operations. They were not going to fight an enemy who had attacked human worlds. They were going to protect a species they had never met from a threat they had never faced. As the meeting ended, Kate walked to the observation deck of the Defiant. Through the transparent aluminum windows, she could see the other ships of Task Force 7 preparing for departure. The Vengeance was loading its fighter squadrons. The destroyers were running final system checks. The supply ships were topping off their fuel tanks. Jake joined her at the window. Are you sure about this, Kate? We could be flying into a trap. Kate understood his concern. The galaxy was full of species who hated humanity. It was possible that the distress signal was fake, designed to lure human ships into an ambush. But something about the message felt genuine to her. I have been reading the intercepted communications, Kate said. The Krellians are really there. They are really moving toward the Zelthara system, and the Zelthari are really terrified. The Krellians will know we are coming, Jake said. Our quantum drives leave signatures that can be detected across light years. They will have time to prepare. Kate smiled, but it was not a pleasant smile. Good, let them prepare. Let them understand that the humans are coming. Word of the human fleet's departure spread quickly through the galactic communication networks. Species across the galaxy monitored the news feeds, watching for updates about the movement of Task Force 7 on the bridge of a trading vessel near the Rigel system. Captain Torbic read the latest reports to his crew. The humans have left their home system, he said. They are heading toward the Zelthara sector. His crew members looked at each other with expressions of fear and fascination. They had heard the stories about human fleets. Ships that looked like flying weapons. Crews that fought with the fury of wild animals. Technology that could destroy entire worlds. Are they going to fight the Krellians? Asked his first officer. It appears so, Torbic replied. The Zelthari sent them a distress signal. The first officer shook his head. Those poor people. They asked for help and got the humans instead. But other species were watching the news with different emotions. On the industrial world of Kepler 7, the insectoid Manthari had been preparing to evacuate their colonies. When they heard about the human fleet, they paused their evacuation plans. Perhaps, said Hivemind Kekthara, the humans will succeed, where others have failed. The Krellians themselves were aware of the human fleet's movement. Their war mind, the collective consciousness that controlled the entire swarm, analyzed the threat data. Humans were known to be dangerous, but the Krellians had never fought them directly. 36 ships, the war mind calculated. We have 823 vessels. The odds are acceptable. But some of the individual Krellian ship minds were not so confident. They had heard the stories too. Stories of human ships that fought like cornered animals. Stories of human crews that preferred death to surrender. Stories of battles where the humans had won against impossible odds. "We should avoid direct confrontation," suggested Shipmind Krelthak. "Complete the consumption of the Zelthari worlds and move on before the humans arrive." "No," the Warmind replied. "We do not retreat. We do not fear any species. We will consume the Zelthari worlds and destroy the human fleet." The space around Zelthara Prime shimmered as Task Force 7 dropped out of hyperspace. Captain Vexthani stood on the bridge of the defense station, watching his sensors as 36 human ships materialized at the edge of his star system. The energy readings were beyond anything he had ever seen. "Captain," Communications Officer Helenana said, her voice shaking, "the lead ship is requesting permission to approach." Vexthani felt his heart beating fast. The human ships looked exactly like the stories described them. They were angular and dark, covered in armor plating and weapon systems. The largest ship, which his sensors identified as the UES Defiant, was over 2 kilometers long and radiated enough power to fuel his entire world for a year. "Grant them permission," Vexthani said, "and prepare a diplomatic shuttle. We need to meet them in person." 20 minutes later, Vexthani's shuttle approached the massive human dreadnought. The Defiant was even more intimidating up close. Its hull was scarred from countless battles, and its weapons could be seen clearly through the transparent sections of the ship. Everything about it spoke of violence and destruction. The shuttle bay of the Defiant was enormous, easily large enough to hold a dozen Zelthari vessels. As Vexthani and his small diplomatic team stepped out of their shuttle, they were met by a group of humans in dark blue uniforms. The first thing that struck Vexthani was how solid the humans looked. Where the Zelthari were tall and thin, the humans were shorter but much more muscular. Their eyes were small and focused, and they moved with the confident precision of natural predators. "Captain Vexthani," said a human woman stepping forward. "I am Captain Nina Clark, Diplomatic Officer for Task Force 7. Admiral Morrison is waiting to meet with you." Nina Clark was smaller than the other humans, but she spoke with authority. Her brown hair was pulled back in a practical style, and her dark eyes showed intelligence and concern. She did not look like the monster that Vexthani had expected. "Captain Clark," Vexthani said, trying to keep his voice steady, "on behalf of the Zelthari people, I thank you for responding to our distress call." Nina smiled, and the expression made her look even more human. "We came as soon as we received your message. Admiral Morrison wants to understand the tactical situation before we make our plans." They walked through the corridors of the Defiant, and Vexthani could not help but notice how different everything was from Zelthari ships. Where his people grew their vessels from living materials, the humans built theirs from metal and composite materials. Everything was designed for efficiency and durability. The walls were covered with damage control equipment, medical stations, and emergency supplies. The humans they passed in the corridors were all different sizes and colors, but they all shared the same alert, confident manner. They nodded respectfully to Vexthani and his team, but their eyes never stopped moving, always watching for potential threats. The briefing room was large and practical, with a holographic display showing the entire Zelthara system. Admiral Kate Morrison stood at the head of the table, studying the tactical data. She was older than Captain Clark, with gray hair and scars on her hands that spoke of many battles. "Captain Vexthani," Admiral Morrison said, turning to face him. "I'm Admiral Kate Morrison, Commander of Task Force 7. Please, sit down and tell us everything you know about the Krellian threat." Vexthani sat at the table, surrounded by human officers. Captain Jake Sullivan of the Defiant sat to his right, a man with intense blue eyes and the build of a warrior. Captain Lisa Chun of the Vengeance sat across from him, smaller than the others but with an air of dangerous competence. Commander Rick Barnes looked like he could break Vexthani in half without effort. "The Krellian swarm entered our system 6 hours ago," Vexthani began. "They have already consumed the mining station at Zelthara 7 and the agricultural world of Zelthara 4. Our sensors count 823 ships in their formation. Admiral Morrison nodded. What kind of defensive capabilities do your people have? We have 52 ships, Vextani admitted. Most are transports or science vessels. Only 12 are equipped for combat, and our weapons are designed to disable rather than destroy. The human officers exchanged glances. Vextani could see them doing the mathematics in their heads. 800 Krellian ships against 36 human ships and 12 Zalthari vessels. The odds were terrible. Captain, Admiral Morrison said. Gently, I need to ask you something important. Do you understand what your people have done by calling us? Vextani looked at her in confusion. I do not understand the question, Admiral. Most species in the galaxy are afraid of us, Admiral Morrison explained. They call us Deathworlders and monsters. They believe we are as dangerous as the Krellians themselves. When we arrive at your homeworld, your people may be more frightened of us than of the enemy. Vextani thought about this. It was true that the stories about humans were terrifying, but sitting in this room surrounded by these officers, he did not feel the terror he had expected. He felt something else entirely. Admiral, he said slowly, may I ask you a question? Of course. Why did you come? Your people have no treaty with mine. You gain nothing by fighting the Krellians. You could have ignored our message and remained safe in your own territory. Admiral Morrison was quiet for a moment. Then she said, because you asked for help. Because 60 billion innocent people are about to die if we do nothing. Because that is what we do. Even though you have never met us before? Especially because we have never met you before, Captain Clark said. The galaxy has enough predators. It needs more protectors. Vextani felt something shift in his understanding. These humans were not the monsters of the stories. They were something much more complex. They had the capacity for terrible violence, but they chose to use that capacity to defend the innocent. Admiral, he said, what do you need from us? Information. Admiral Morrison replied. Everything you know about Krellian tactics, their ship capabilities, their movement patterns, and we need you to help us coordinate with your people. When the shooting starts, we cannot afford to have friendly fire incidents. The briefing continued for 2 hours. The humans asked detailed questions about Krellian technology, their hive mind structure, and their previous attacks on other worlds. Vextani was impressed by their thoroughness and their obvious experience with military planning. When the meeting ended, Captain Clark escorted Vextani back to his shuttle. As they walked through the corridors, she asked, Are you afraid of US, Captain? Vextani considered the question carefully. I was afraid before I met you. The stories about humans are frightening. But now I think I understand something. What is that? You are not monsters, you are guardians. The stories make you sound terrifying because you need to be terrifying to the things that threaten peaceful species, Nina smiled. That is a very wise observation, Captain. As Vextani's shuttle returned to the defense station, he could see the human fleet positioning itself between Zalthara Prime and the approaching Krellian swarm. The sight was both frightening and reassuring. These ships were built for war, but they were fighting for peace. Back on the defense station, Vextani called an emergency meeting with the planetary government. The leaders of Zalthara Prime gathered in the council chamber, their faces showing the strain of the past few days. What are the humans like? Asked Elder Quivera. They are not what we expected, Vextani replied. They are professional soldiers, but they are also decent people. They came here to protect us, not to conquer us. But they are still Deathworlders, said Elder Jaltheron. They still carry weapons that could destroy our world. Yes, Vextani agreed. But they are pointing those weapons at our enemies, not at us. Meanwhile, aboard the Defiant, Admiral Morrison stood in the command center watching the tactical display. The Krellian swarm was still 12 hours away from the main population centers, but their advanced scout ships were already probing the outer defenses. Admiral, Captain Sullivan said, we are receiving communications from across the galaxy. Everyone is watching to see what happens here, Morrison nodded. She had expected this. The battle at Zelthara would be more than just a military engagement. It would be a test of humanity's role in the galactic community. Long-range sensors are detecting movement from the Krellian main body, reported Lieutenant Commander Walsh. They appear to be accelerating their approach. They know we are here, Morrison said. They are going to test us. Captain Chen's voice came over the communication system from the Vengeance. Admiral, my fighter squadrons are ready for launch. We can begin harassing their advance units. Negative, Morrison replied. Let them come to us. I want to see how they fight before we commit our forces. The hours passed slowly. The Krellian swarm moved steadily toward the inner system, their formation blotting out the stars behind them. On Zelthara Prime, the population watched their sky with growing fear. But they also watched the human fleet, and many of them began to feel something they had not felt in days. Hope. The Krellian warmind analyzed the tactical situation. The humans had positioned their fleet in a defensive formation around the main population centers. Their ships were powerful, but they were vastly outnumbered. The logical course of action was to overwhelm them with superior numbers. The first Krellian scout ships appeared on the sensors like dark spots moving across the stars. Captain Vexthani watched from the defense station as the enemy vessels approached the outer edge of the Zelthara system. Each scout ship was the size of a small moon, its surface covered in biomechanical weapons that pulsed with sickly green light. Admiral Morrison, Vexthani said into his communication device, the Krellian scouts are moving toward the fourth planet. There are 12 of them. From the bridge of the UES Defiant, Admiral Morrison studied the tactical display. The enemy. Scouts were moving in a loose formation, testing the human defenses. She knew this was just the beginning. Captain Sullivan, she said to Jake, prepare main batteries. Target the lead scout ship. Jake nodded and turned to his weapons officer. Lock on target? Fire when ready. The Defiant's main guns charged with a deep humming sound that could be felt throughout the ship. Then they fired. Beams of pure energy lanced across space, brighter than the system's sun. The lead Krellian scout ship simply vanished, vaporized. In an instant, on Zelthara Prime, millions of people watched the sky through telescopes and sensor feeds. They saw the flash of light as the human weapons fired, and they saw the enemy ship disappear. For the first time in days, some of them began to believe they might survive. The remaining Krellian scouts immediately changed course, spreading out to make themselves harder targets. But the human fleet was ready for them. Captain Lisa Shunz. Fighters launched from the UES Vengeance, small but deadly ships that moved like angry insects through space. This is Fighter Squadron Alpha, came the voice of Lieutenant Alex Murphy over the communication channel. We have visual on enemy scouts. Beginning attack run. The human fighters moved with precision that amazed Vexthani. They worked together, like parts of a single organism, covering each other and striking at the enemy's weak points. Their weapons were much smaller than the Defiant's main guns, but they were accurate and deadly. One by one, the Krellian scout ships fell. They tried to fight back, but their weapons seemed slow and clumsy compared to the human fighters. In less than 30 minutes, all 12 enemy scouts had been destroyed. Scout engagement complete, Admiral Morrison announced to the fleet. All ships, prepare for main attack. The real battle is about to begin. The Krellian warmind processed the destruction of the scout ships with cold calculation. The humans were more effective than expected, but they were still vastly outnumbered. The loss of 12 ships from a force of over 800 was acceptable. Begin main assault, the warmind commanded. All ships advance on the inner system. Destroy the human fleet. The Krellian swarm moved forward like a dark cloud, blotting out the stars. Their ships came in waves, each one the size of a city and covered in weapons that could crack planets. The sound of their engines created a low rumble that could be heard across the vacuum of space. Through their ships' hulls, Admiral Morrison watched the approaching horde with calm eyes. She had fought impossible odds before, but never quite like this. 800 ships against 36. It should have been suicide. All ships move to battle formation, she ordered. Destroyers take point. Cruisers provide fire support. The Defiant and Vengeance will hold the center. The human fleet rearranged itself with military precision. Commander Rick Barnes laid his destroyer squadron forward, their smaller ships bristling with weapons and defensive systems. The cruisers spread out behind them, creating overlapping fields of fire. The two largest ships, the Defiant and Vengeance, took position to protect Zalthara Prime itself. "Here they come," Jake said from the captain's chair of the Defiant. The first wave of Krellian ships opened fire while still millions of kilometers away. Green energy beams and projectile weapons filled the space between the fleets. The human ships responded immediately, their return fire lighting up the darkness like a fireworks display, but this was not like the scout engagement. The Krellian main ships were huge and heavily armored. Human weapons that had vaporized the scouts now only left burn marks on the enemy hulls. It was going to be a long fight. "Direct hit on the lead enemy ship," reported the weapons officer aboard the Defiant. "Minimal damage." Admiral Morrison frowned. If their best weapons were only causing minimal damage, they needed to change tactics. "All ships concentrate fire on single targets, overwhelm their defenses one ship at a time." The human fleet responded to her orders with practiced efficiency. Instead of spreading their fire across multiple targets, they focused all their weapons on one Krellian ship at a time. The concentrated barrage was devastating. The first enemy ship broke apart under the sustained assault, its hull cracking like an eggshell, but for every Krellian ship they destroyed, 10 more took its place. The enemy kept coming in endless waves, their formations so thick that destroyed ships were immediately replaced by fresh ones from behind. "Damage report," Admiral Morrison called out. "The destroyer Use Thunder has taken heavy damage," came the reply from Commander Barnes. "Hull breaches on decks 4 and 7. We are still in the fight, but barely." The battle raged for 2 hours. Human ships darted between the massive Krellian vessels like wolves attacking a herd of elephants. They used their superior speed and maneuverability to avoid the worst of the enemy fire, but they could not avoid it all. The cruiser UES Liberty exploded in a ball of fire, taking its crew of 400 with it. The destroyer UES Storm lost its main engines and was forced to drift out of the battle. Slowly but steadily, the human fleet was being worn down on Zalthara Prime. Captain Vexthani watched the battle with growing despair. The humans were fighting with incredible skill and courage, but they were simply outnumbered. For every enemy ship they destroyed, they lost one of their own. At this rate, the human fleet would be wiped out within hours. "Captain, communications." Officer Helenana said, "I am receiving a transmission from Admiral Morrison." The Admiral's face appeared on the main screen. She looked tired but determined. "Captain Vexthani, I need you to evacuate all non-essential personnel from Zalthara Prime. Get them to the outer worlds or to deep space if possible." "Admiral," Vexthani said, "are you retreating?" "No," Morrison replied firmly. "We are not retreating. But this battle is going to get much worse before it gets better. I want your people as far away as possible when that happens." Vexthani understood. The humans were planning something desperate, something that would be dangerous. Even to their allies, the situation changed suddenly when the Krellian war mind made a critical decision. Instead of continuing the slow-grinding battle, it ordered a direct assault on Zalthara Prime itself. If the humans wanted to protect the planet, they would have to come out of their defensive formation and fight in the open. New enemy formation detected. Lieutenant Commander Walsh reported from the Defiant sensor station. 200 ships breaking off from the main group. They are heading directly for the planet. Admiral Morrison felt her blood turn cold. If those ships reached Zalthara Prime, they could kill billions of people in minutes. The human fleet had to stop them, but that meant abandoning their defensive position and fighting in open space where the Krellians had every advantage. "All ships intercept course," she ordered. "We cannot let them reach the planet." The human fleet moved to block the Krellian assault force, but it was exactly what the enemy wanted. As soon as the humans left their defensive formation, the remaining 600 Krellian ships attacked from all sides. The battle became a chaotic melee. Human ships found themselves surrounded by enemies, fighting desperately to survive. The Destroyer UES Ranger was overwhelmed by 5 Krellian ships and exploded in seconds. The cruiser used Justice tried to ram an enemy vessel and both ships were destroyed in the collision. Captain Lisa Chun launched every fighter she had from the Vengeance, sending them into the heart of the enemy formation. All fighters, priority. Targets are the ships heading for the planet. Stop them at any cost. Lieutenant Alex Murphy led his squadron in a suicide run against the enemy ships. His fighters dodged through a storm of enemy fire, losing half their number in the first minutes. But they reached their targets and began attacking the Krellian ships with everything they had. "This is Alpha Leader," Murphy's voice came over the radio, strained with effort. "We are taking heavy casualties, but we are slowing them down." "Admiral." Morrison watched the tactical display with growing desperation. Her fleet was being destroyed ship by ship, and the enemy was still pushing toward the planet. They needed a miracle, or 60 billion people were going to die. That was when Captain Jake Sullivan made a decision that would be remembered throughout the galaxy. "Admiral," he said over the communication channel, "I am taking the Defiant on a direct course for the enemy flagship." Morrison understood immediately what he was planning. "Jake, that is suicide. You will never make it through their defenses." "Maybe not," Jake replied calmly. "But if I can take out their war mind, the rest of their fleet will be confused long. Enough for you to finish them." The UES Defiant turned toward the center of the Krellian formation, where the massive flagship controlled the entire swarm. The ship's engines roared to full power as Jake pushed them beyond their safety limits. "All power to forward shields," Jake ordered his crew. "Divert life support if you have to. We are going in." The space around Zalthara Priam was filled with the wreckage of both fleets. Broken ships drifted slowly through the void, their hulls torn open and their systems dark. But the battle was finally over. The last Krellian ship had been destroyed 6 hours ago, and now the survivors were counting the cost of victory. Admiral Kate Morrison stood on the emergency bridge of the UES Vengeance, which had become the flagship after the destruction of the Defiant. Through the transparent aluminum windows, she could see the debris field that stretched for millions of kilometers. Each piece of wreckage represented lives lost, both human and alien. "Final casualty report, Admiral," said Captain Lisa Chun, her face grim with exhaustion. "We lost 18 ships out of 36. Total crew casualties are 7,312. Kate closed her eyes for a moment. 7,000 people who would never see Earth again. Families who would never see their loved ones return home. The price of protecting 60 billion strangers had been terrible. What about the Defiant? Kate asked, though she already knew the answer. "No survivors, ma'am. Captain Sullivan and his entire crew went down with the ship when it rammed the Krellian flagship." Kate nodded slowly. Jake Sullivan had been her friend for 20 years. He had saved the day with his sacrifice, but that did not make his loss any easier to bear. "Admiral," came the voice of Captain Nina Clark over the communication system. "The Zalthari government is requesting permission to approach. They want to speak with you personally." "Grant them permission," Kate replied, "and prepare to receive diplomatic visitors." An hour later, Kate stood in the shuttle bay of the Vengeance as a Zalthari diplomatic vessel landed. The ship was beautiful, grown rather than built, with flowing curves that reminded her of a flower. It was so different from human vessels that it might as well have come from another universe. Captain Vexthani stepped out of the shuttle, followed by Elder Quivera and several other Zalthari officials. Their faces showed a mixture of gratitude, sadness, and something that looked like awe. "Admiral Morrison," Vexthani said, his voice filled with emotion. "On behalf of all 60 billion Zalthari, I thank you for what you have done here." Kate looked at the alien captain. He was tall and graceful, with skin that seemed to glow with inner light. Everything about him spoke of peace and gentleness. It was hard to believe that such beings had ever needed the protection of human warriors. "We did what we came here to do," Kate said simply. "The Krellian threat has been eliminated." Elder Quivera stepped forward. She was ancient even by Zalthari standards, her translucent skin showing the wisdom of centuries. Admiral, we understand that your people have paid a terrible price for our survival. How can we ever repay such a debt? Kate was quiet for a moment. The Zelthari were offering to pay for their rescue, but she knew they had nothing that humanity needed. Their technology was based on growth and healing, not industry or military power. Their wealth was in art and philosophy, not in resources or weapons. You don't owe us anything, Kate said finally. We didn't come here for payment. We came because you needed help. The Zelthari looked at each other in confusion. Elder Quivera spoke again. But Admiral, your people have given their lives for us. Surely you must want something in return. Kate thought about how to explain. The concept of fighting without expectation of reward seemed foreign to most galactic species. They were used to mercenaries and conditional alliances, not people who risked everything for strangers. Elder Quiviera, Kate said gently, imagine that you saw a child drowning in a river. Would you demand payment before jumping in to save them? The elderly Zelthari considered this. No, of course not, but that is different. That is a moral duty. This is also a moral duty, Kate replied. You asked for help, and we had the power to provide it. That made it our responsibility to act. Captain Vexthani shook his head in wonder. Your species truly is unlike any other in the galaxy. We have heard the stories about human warriors, but we never understood the truth behind them. What truth is that? Kate asked. That you are not monsters at all, you are protectors. The galaxy fears you because you are so effective at war, but you only wage war to defend the innocent. Kate smiled sadly. We didn't choose to be warriors, Captain. Our world made us into fighters because everything on Earth tried to kill us. But we learned to use that strength to protect those who cannot protect themselves. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Commander Rick Barnes, whose destroyer squadron had suffered heavy losses in the battle. Admiral, we are receiving communications from across the galaxy. Word of the battle is spreading. Kate nodded. She had expected this. The defeat of the Krellian swarm would be major news throughout known space. The Krellians had been one of the galaxy's greatest threats for centuries, and now they were gone. What kind of communications? She asked. Mixed reactions, ma'am. Some species are celebrating the end of the Krellian threat. Others are expressing concern about human military capabilities. A few are demanding explanations for our involvement in non-human affairs. Kate understood the concern. Humanity had just demonstrated that they could defeat one of the galaxy's most feared enemies. Some species would see this as a welcome development, but others would view it as a new threat to worry about. Captain Clark, Kate said, prepare. A message for transmission to the Galactic Council. Tell them that Task Force 7 responded to a distress signal from a peaceful species under attack by the Krellians. Our mission was defensive in nature, and we have no territorial claims in this system. Yes, ma'am, Nina replied. Should I mention our casualties? Kate thought about this. The galaxy needed to understand that humanity had paid a price for this victory. They were not invincible conquerors, just people who were willing to sacrifice for others. Include the casualty figures, she said. Let them know that protecting the innocent is never free. Over the next several hours, reports continued to arrive from across the galaxy. The reaction to the Battle of Zelthara was unlike anything in recorded history. For the first time, a species had deliberately intervened to save another species from the Krellians. On the industrial world of Kepler-7, the Manthari hive mind called an emergency session. The humans have done what we thought impossible, declared Kekthara. They have destroyed the Krellian swarm in open battle. But at what cost? Asked another hive mind. They lost half their fleet. No species can sustain such losses indefinitely. That is exactly the point, Kekthara replied. They were willing to accept such losses to save strangers. This changes everything we thought we knew about them. Similar conversations were taking place on worlds throughout the galaxy. The Rigel Alliance called an emergency meeting to discuss the implications of human military power. The Centauri Federation began drafting proposals for formal diplomatic relations with Earth. Even the isolationist vegan empire started to reconsider their policies toward the human worlds. But perhaps the most important reaction came from the peaceful species that had been living in fear of the Krellians. On agricultural worlds and research stations, in art colonies and philosophical communes, billions of beings who had never spoken to a human began to understand something new. Earth's Deathworlders were not the monsters they had been told about. They were guardians. Back in the Zelthara system, the cleanup operation continued. Human and Zelthari ships worked together to clear the debris field and search for survivors. The cooperation between the two species was remarkable, given that they had never worked together before. Captain Vexthani found himself spending more and more time aboard the human ships. He was fascinated by their efficiency and their dedication to their duties. Even after their terrible losses, the human crews continued to work with professional competence. "Captain," he said to Lisa Shun as they watched the salvage operations, "may I ask you a personal question?" "Of course," Lisa replied. "Do you regret coming here?" "Your people have lost so much to save mine." Lisa looked out at the debris field where the Defiant had made its final sacrifice. "Captain Vexthani, my species has a saying, the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. We could not do nothing while 60 billion innocent people faced extermination. But the cost ... the cost is always high," Lisa said quietly. "But the cost of doing nothing would have been higher. Your people would be dead, and the Krellians would have moved on to the next system. How many more worlds would they have consumed?" Vexthani understood. The humans had not just saved the Zelthari. They had saved every species that the Krellians would have attacked in the future. As the days passed, more ships began arriving in the Zelthara system. Medical vessels came to help treat the wounded. Transport ships arrived to assist with the evacuation of damaged stations. Diplomatic vessels brought representatives from dozens of species who wanted to see the aftermath of the great battle. Among these visitors was a delegation from the Galactic Council itself. Chancellor Morvek, a tall reptilian being from the Draconian hegemony, came aboard the Vengeance to meet with Admiral Morrison personally. "Admiral," the Chancellor said in his deep, rumbling voice, "the Council has asked me to deliver an official message. We wish to express our gratitude for your actions against the Krellian threat.